Welcome all to this first 5x5 time together, story sharing. This was something Anna brought to us. The idea she brought from 10x9. And the idea is we're going to hear 5 people, although maybe 4 people tonight, but 5 people tell 5 stories for 5 minutes. I say stories, it might be an image, it might be some music, it might be a poem, or it might be a story. And one of those will be a story from scripture. So our theme tonight is wandering. So that's our 5 minutes, 5 stories. We want to resonate with those stories. So afterwards, we're going to have a conversation about what those stories said to us, whether they resonated with our own stories, and hopefully opportunity to share those stories. If you're joining us online at that point, we'll probably cut off this so we can have that conversation privately, but we'd be very pleased to see your thoughts on the WhatsApp or on the Facebook page if you've watched it and enjoyed it. Wandering is actually, it's kind of my term, and it's the simple term, but there's something called peregrinato pro Christo, which is posh name for wandering, but it actually is an ancient Celtic practice, and it was used by certainly saints of old, the monks who were involved in missioning to different lands, and particularly in this country, the people from Ireland, when they were seeking where to mission, how to mission, they would just walk, or quite often they would get in a coracle, which is not a very steerable kind of craft at the best of times, I think, unless you're very good, but they would allow the current to carry them somewhere. So there's very much a sense of truly allowing God to take them where God would like them to be. But there's a strong sense of them, as they arrived in places, continuing that sense of being led by what they felt was a hint or a nudge from God, not having a fixed direction, but allowing God to shape their journey and take them to a destination. So the first story we're going to watch, all being well, if it works, is a story from the Bible that I've recorded, a couple of stories from the Bible that I'm just going to reflect on. So we'll watch those together. The idea for wandering was inspired by Abraham. In the book of Genesis, chapter 12, God promises Abraham that he will be blessed and his family will be a blessing to all the peoples of earth. But at 75 years of age, settled, prosperous, knowing what he was doing, having some authority in the area, being quite a wealthy person, God's were asking him to up sticks and set off. And this isn't just Abraham, but a whole cohort of his family, servants, animals, everything. No directions, no destination, just to leave the place he is at. Abraham, to me, follows his instincts. Initially, he follows the rivers, which is quite a logical step given the arid land. And as he journeys, God speaks to him. He meets him from time to time. And every time Abraham hears God speak, he builds an altar of stones and gives thanks and says, God is in this place. I see the same in the story of Paul. Paul is a missionary. Change the screen there. And he's successfully traveled from Jerusalem through Antioch, Derbe, Lystra, Iconium, and to another place in Antioch. He's been a successful missionary, but you get the sense that at this point he's not quite sure where to go next in the gospel. But there is a logic to his decisions, and as he travels through Gentile lands, he seeks out places of population, he seeks out ports, he seeks out places where news can be spread. And so he leaves Antioch and heads to Bithynia. Peter later was very successful in preaching the gospel there. He converted hundreds of people, thousands of people. But the gospel in Acts says that when Paul and his cohorts came to the border, the Spirit of Jesus would not allow them to cross into Bithynia. Now, we don't know what that means, what that discernment process was. Did they encounter actual opposition? Did they get a gut feel? Did God speak to Paul in some way and actually send him awry. Whatever it was, Paul was obedient. And so they pass by, they change direction, and they head to Troas near the coast. Again, logic, let's go where there's options, there's people around. And during the night in Troas, Paul has a dream, a man of Macedonia. I always wonder how he knew it was from Macedonia. I'm guessing the frock. It's quite a distinct headgear the soldiers had, maybe even had an image of Alexander. And this man asks for help. So Paul heads across the sea. And again, where do you go? I mean, Macedonia is a huge place. He uses logic. He goes to Samothrace, he goes to Neapolis, and then Philippi. And Philippi particularly is a place where he would have been comfortable operating. It's like a Roman retirement colony. Paul's a Roman. He would have known how things work. And while he was in Philippi, he goes to the places he knows is being successful. There's no place to meet, but he knows that when Jews have no place to meet, they go to the river, and he goes there. And he meets Lydia, and the story goes on. The first female-led church in Europe is formed. What I love about both those stories, and there are others, is the combination of listening and discerning what God wants, combined with common sense and logic. When God goes quiet, when things go quiet, when there's no obvious direction, they do what they hope is right, but it seems to me always open to that nudge from God to change direction. And for me, in these uncertain times, when it's so far from clear what the right response to the issues that surround us is, that feels like a way to proceed. That feels like a way forward. Trusting God is with us and watching and guiding, and that those nudges will come, those encounters will come that either encourage us on or give us a new direction. Few of us are called to leave homes, direction unknown, step into a new place, uproot everything we feel that gives us solidity in life. But in the small things, we can begin to live like this. We can reflect and notice the presence of God. We respond to the nudges we have to change routines, to do something new, to respond in action through our prayers. And we can take the risk of doing it and seeing where it will lead. Okay, so that's, you got my sermon, my mini sermon there. I asked Lydia, because I knew she's been through a process of discerning her spiritual path, if she could share with us. She wasn't able to be with us physically because she's heading down to see family, but I'm going to watch, all being well, Lydia's chat now.
Hello, my name is Lydia, and I have been part of the Kairos movement for a little while now. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the children and family work enabler in the Goole and Selby Methodist Circuit, and I have been exploring, wondering, and figuring out my calling, as it were, and my vocation over the last couple of years. Sort of partway through the pandemic, after doing weekly online services for my church community when our minister was on sabbatical, a couple of people suggested to me that I should maybe explore my vocation as potentially an ordained minister in the Methodist Church. And so I put myself forward for candidating for Methodist ministry, which is the process of discernment, mutual discernment between myself and many people in the church, to see if I was called to do this or not. The process itself was very illuminating. I now know far more about myself in many ways than I did before I started this process. And there have been so many treasures as a result of that. I moved church as a result to a place where I feel much more at home, much more like I'm following my call, and much more supported as well in all of that. I have also done the what's it called? Sorry, the pioneering course with CMS this year with Leanne and Fran, and this has been really good to really affirming. Wouldn't necessarily have labelled myself as a pioneer maybe 3-4 years ago. I was just part of the pioneering groups to get excited again about Methodism in some ways. But the pioneering course itself has shown me my gifts, my talents, paved a potential way forward where I will be able to seek God more and seek to reveal some more about myself as well in that process. In the course, there's been a lot of growth, and through the candidating process, there was a lot of growth too. Definitely not the same person I was 2 years ago, but with God's help, I will continue to grow, hopefully. I think through the Kairos movement and the pioneering course as well, I've learnt to wander with God, and that doesn't mean the wandering and thinking, but wandering and taking time to try and walk in step with God and meet God where they are, instead of thinking and doing things in my own strength. So taking a closer walk with God where I can and seeing where that might lead me. Throughout the pioneering course has been the emphasis on we as pioneers are joining in the work of God, and therefore the onus and responsibility of doing the work doesn't fully rest on our shoulders, and that has been something that has been completely freeing for me as well. So I hope this gives you some insight into the way that I feel I have grown and wandered with God in the last sort of 3 years maybe, and I wish you well in your own wandering.
Thanks.
So we turn to our live folks here now. I think Hannah is she's got a poem for us and a bit of a tell us why that poem's special to us. So, Hannah.
Hello everyone. So you probably will all be familiar with this poem. I'm going to read a poem and then tell you a little bit of a story, and then I've got sort of my own kind of reflection on that. So it's the famous William Wordsworth poem, which I will read. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high over vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils, beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. Continuous as the stars that shine and twinkle on the Milky Way, they stretched in never-ending line along the margin of a bay. 10,000 saw I at a glance, tossing their heads in sprightly dance. The waves beside them danced, but they outdid the sparkling waves in glee. A poet could not but be gay in such a cozened company. I gazed and gazed, but little thought what wealth the show to me had brought. For oft when on my couch I lie, in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude. And then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils. So that obviously is a very famous Wordsworth poem. And it was sort of the first thing that came to mind when I saw the topic was wandering, because my mum, it comes up a lot with my mum and my gran. So my gran is 98 now, she's doing very well, and she loves poetry. She's at the point now where she struggles to remember things, but up until recently she could just reel off a number of poems, because that's how she was brought up, and she really loves it. And so a few years ago, actually in 2020, she was involved. My gran was involved in a national project, I think it was. So I'll just read you a little bit. On April 7th, 1770, William Wordsworth was born in Cockermouth. 250 years later, in April 2020, 50 descendants of William Wordsworth decided to build an archive of different people reading poems by Wordsworth. They began by reading one poem each, then asked celebrities to join in, and finally it was opened up to the general public. So somehow my mum found out about this, and wanted my gran to take part, because this poem she knows really well. And so they asked the carers in the home to record her reading 3 poems. One was I Wandered Lonely on a Cloud. And then my mum sent that to Christopher Wordsworth, who is Wordsworth's great grandson. And basically my gran is on their website reading this poem, which alongside some quite famous people, and she's had some lovely feedback, which is really nice. And the nice thing is that, like, when she did it, so it was only 2 years ago, but she just had she gave the same sort of, you know, level of diction and expression that she always has done. So it's really quite a special thing, because that's something that obviously will stay with us once she's gone. So yeah, that was sort of the story behind the poem. And then I was also sort of reflecting on that and what the poem is about, and I don't, my reflection is that I don't know if you can wander with someone else, or whether wandering is truly something that you need to do alone. And so I started to and I always find that when I'm wandering in nature, which is what I think the poem is suggesting, that's when my brain seems to come alive and can lead me down all kinds of paths of thinking. And so I've got one line of what potentially could be a poem, and it's just this: I wonder why wandering makes you wonder. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you ever so much. Yeah. So does anybody on the sofa want to offer us a thought? Having heard, we've had 4 stories, so there's room for one more if anybody's up for it.
Okay. I've probably got 2, but I'll do them really quick. So the first one is when I was going through a big drug addiction, and I ended up living on the streets, and for 4 years I've kind of wandered, from place to place, or not being settled in a kind of way, and whether the police wanted me, whether I had to go back to court or go back to prison. There's always periods where I had a sense of freedom in wandering, but in order for me to really wander, I needed like money, resources, food, drink, but I kind of felt restrained, because drugs was always part of my life, but since I kind of went into the rehab and kind of got myself sorted out, I really do enjoy the lifestyle I have now, where I'm more settled and I'm spiritually good, and I just enjoy wandering, with a lovely wife. Fiona. And part of that was last night we ended up parking up somewhere, and we were just getting in touch with family, having a bit of a catch up, and there was a knock on the van, and there was this guy called Ben, who we haven't seen for a few weeks, and he's a wanderer, and so he come bearing gifts, so we ended up having a chat with him, and finding out a bit more about his story, and it was and I guess if we wasn't in the position that we was in, then we wouldn't have been there. It was just nice to kind of have an open and frank conversation with someone who was going through. He's going through I wouldn't say a difficult time, but he's recently kind of his relationship is split up 6 months ago, and he finds a fair amount of comfort of being in his van. And because he helped us, bearing a couple of gifts last night, so having a bit of a chat with him, and so I've got a leisure battery of all things to pack on to him tonight. Yeah. So it was just it was just a nice experience that all the times we're kind of travelled around this coming up to nearly a year now. We've had some really good moments, being out and about and talking to people. But it's kind of and the consequence of our wandering is, we're going to wander elsewhere to a different part of the country.
Thank you, Gav. Yeah. Any more room for one more? If anybody's got something. Yep.
Oh, this is a good one.
I don't know what I'm going to say. Oh, this goes back a bit. This one. This is when I was 26. I was on a mission training time in Scotland, and I was peopled out. So I wanted to go for a walk, and I didn't let people know where I was going. And I just went off, and there was a sort of a castle place in the far distance. I thought, I'll try and walk over there. So I was walking, enjoying the solitude, and just being able to process things, and because it was quite an intense time of training. And as I walked over what looked like a grassy area, I started to sink. And as I walked, I got up to my waist, and I started to panic, obviously. So I started to swear and speak in tongues at the same time. So I was manically praying, and I have no idea how I managed to get onto the bank. But the next thing I knew, I was safe and I was well. And I looked at my leggings completely soaked in mud. So that was a bit of a shaky experience. So I came back to the base and I just said to somebody, told him what had just happened. And he said, you're a bit daft doing that. People die going out in the bogs. So it could have been a lot worse. I'm laughing now, but but I'm just so thankful for God's grace, because I guess I'm quite independent in lots of ways. I tend to just go off sometimes, and he saved me, really. That was good. So that's my story of wandering off. And there's been other times. There's a time in India where I was traveling on my own, and came out of the airport, got into a taxi, and asked this taxi driver to take me to this hotel, which I'd booked ahead. And he just started to say, no, I'm not taking you there, I'm not taking you there. I said, well, yes, you are. Yes, you are. And that awful feeling of, oh, heck, what's going on here? And he was an older guy, he probably looked about 70-year-old guy. So I didn't feel afraid in a sort of sexual way, but I just thought, where's he taking me? And it was just a panic prayer. Oh God, oh please, oh please. And somehow or other, through the language and the trying to get in touch with the hotel, and anyway, I got to where I was going, and it was all good. But I have known times in my wandering of just God's protection and God's care, and just that sense of, oh, okay, and also learning to go at God's pace. I tend to run off sometimes, and I've learned just to slow it down and just to listen and try and go at His pace.
Thank you. Well, we've had our 5 stories, so apologies to those who are not with us in person, but we're going to stop the recording now. So you won't get to hear the stories that's invoked for us or the conversation, but hopefully you'll join us next time.